Okay, here we go. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Psychology of Wellbeing. Okay, I'm Charlie Lee and welcome to the Psychology of Wellbeing module. So, what I want to do for you rather, in the first bit of this lecture is tell you about the module. Then I'm going to tell you a bit about well-being. And then there's going to be two more. So there's 3 chunks of this lecture. And the first bit of this chunk is about the general module. Okay, so what the module is going to do is cover some broad ideas and theories about well-being and about what's related to well-being. And sometimes in your lectures there might be little activities within them. So for example, today at the end of each chunk I'm going to give you a little activity to do that should take you about 5-10 minutes, something like that. Okay? But most importantly, each week, Dave Harley, who's the module coordinator, is going to give you a weekly well-being activity. He's going to put that on My Studies each week, and that's going to enable you to have a go at things that have been shown to be related to and possibly improve someone's well-being. So you're going to be trying something out and doing tasks that get you thinking about how the lecture relates to you as a person rather than you as a student, and allow you to reflect on what improves your well-being. Basically, what we want you to do is to get something out of this module as a human, as well as just think about it as learning and doing your assessments. Okay, so each week you're going to get lecture videos, a wellbeing activity, and a live seminar. Oh, and don't forget that actually what's going to happen is your lectures will be available on a Monday afternoon, but then on a Wednesday afternoon, Dave is going to schedule a watch party. What that is, it's a time for students to get together and watch at the same time. Now, you don't have to do this. If you prefer to watch the lecture at a different time whenever you want, that's fine. But we know that some students really miss the idea of a kind of live lecture experience or being in the same place. So Dave's going to try and address that with this thing called the watch party. And you're going to get more information about that separately. So you've got your lecture videos, you've got your watch party, you've got your weekly wellbeing activity, and then you've got your live session, your live seminars, where we're going to be giving you more activities that are related to the understanding of the lecture. And also there's going to be quite a bit of discussing your thoughts and feelings about well-being and about things that are related to well-being. So the important thing is, if all this is too much and you're a bit confused, go and look in the handbook. And if you're still not sure, email Dave Harley because he is the module coordinator. Right, you'll also find this in the handbook. This is the timetable of your lectures week by week. So hopefully you can see that we start with talking about what well-being is, which is today, all these videos. Then you've got me again next week, where I start talking about the measurement of well-being. So basically, once you know how to conceptualise and define well-being and how to measure it, you can start thinking about what improves it. And so you can see that the future lectures are the kinds of things that will involve, things that are related to or might improve well-being. Okay, that's it. That's a quick run around the module. So let's start with today. Okay, so after watching these videos from me, plus attending your live session and doing personal study, you should be able to discuss the different definitions and concepts and theories of well-being, evaluate them a little bit, find the limitations with them, understand why we should be studying well-being, and understand how this all fits in with the rest of the module. So, in order to study something, it helps to define it. There is no right or wrong to this question. I want you to think about, what does well-being mean to you? put me on pause, get a post-it note or jot some notes down somewhere. Now, you could keep these thoughts to yourself, or if you want to, you could take a photograph and upload that photo of your post-it to the Wellbeing Cafe. Or you could put a comment under the line on YouTube where you might find this video if you're doing the watch party. Depends where and when you're watching me, but there's going to be different ways for you to interact if you want to. Also, you don't have to. You can keep it to yourself, but write it down because I'm going to go back to it later on. So, write down what well-being means to you. All right? If lots of you put your ideas in places, we'll end up with an interesting load of thoughts about well-being, and you'll be able to see what other students put. Right, put me on pause and write down what well-being means to you. I'm going to have a bit of Coke. Lovely. So you're meant to put me on pause, but I'll just kind of noodle around. Dooby-dooby-doo. Write what you think well-being means to you. Okay, maybe you've pressed play now and you're just hearing me waffle. Fine. Well-being, what is it? So, this is what happens if you Google it. Okay, this is what you get. Well-being, the state of being comfortable, healthy or happy. I wonder if comfortable, healthy or happy came up in what you said or what other students said. If you look underneath, there's lots of other kind of synonyms. In other words, words that are meant to mean the same as well-being. And there's happiness. Now, certainly happiness tends to be used a lot, and well-being and happiness are often used to mean the same thing. And we'll go on to look at this further in part 3, I think. But if we look at the synonyms for well-being, there's a lot. And they're very varied. There's health, money, security, happiness. So many there that it doesn't really help us know what it is. Yeah? Even if you've put down some of these things, all these things are now so different. Does that actually help us know what well-being is? And even if we just stick with comfortable, healthy, happy, let's say we just stick with those 3, aren't they 3 different things? Or are all 3 of them required for well-being, or do you just need one? For example, can you just be high in health and then have low happiness and low being comfortable, but if you're healthy, that's well-being? So we still don't really know what well-being is, do we? And it's quite confusing. So what we do kind of know is that well-being is a really broad term. Yeah, even in a kind of common sense way, there's loads of things that can be part of well-being. Do any of these things look familiar on this slide? Did any of these come up in your definition or what well-being is for you? So what we're looking at here is the fact that well-being means lots of things. It represents lots of concepts. Is this everything though? Have a look. Again, I'm going to be quiet for like a minute if I can try. Have a look. Do you think that's everything that's part of well-being? Is there anything missing? Well, something that isn't there actually, and you might have noticed this, you might be shouting this at me, where is self-esteem? Is self-esteem part of well-being? Why isn't that there? What about things like the absence of worry or the lack of kind of negativity or negative things? So when we talk about well-being, we can talk about all these things on this slide and more. Okay? But it's important for you to note, and we will go back to this, that to be studied or assessed, many of these things indeed have their own definition. So then are these quite complicated things part of well-being? Well, we're going to kind of explore that in this lecture and next week. But, right, let's have a think historically a little bit about well-being. So, what did the people before us think? Let's think about the ancient Egyptians. Here is Bes, an ancient Egyptian deity. And as you can see, he probably has disproportionately large testicles. And this might be a bit of a clue, actually, to what ancient Egyptians thought about what the good things in life were. This is Bes. He is the god of the good things in life. Okay, so what would you say the good things in life are? Because the ancient Egyptians thought it was about seeking pleasurable feelings. Bes would turn up at festivals that were about fun activities like music, dance and sexual pleasure. It was about universal good feelings and encouraging enjoyment. Okay, but something we can think about is, are music, dance and sex the only good things? Are they the best good things? Are there other good things? Okay, so this is a very kind of limited idea of what good things might be. So, what did some other people before us think? Well, here are the ancient Greeks, and the ancient Greek philosophers did a lot of thinking about well-being, loads and loads and loads. Socrates thought about how one ought to live. In other words, what's a good life? What's the best life? And Aristotle mused a lot and wrote a lot about what is the best thing you can aim for. What's the highest of all practical goods? Okay, so this is what Aristotle said. It is happiness. Okay, both ordinary and cultured people identify happiness with living well or doing well. So what he's saying is that happiness is, the best thing to aim for, and a good life will be a life with happiness. Okay, and that's the best thing to aim for or to want. But there's a stinger here at the end. When it comes to saying what happiness consists, opinions differ. In other words, happiness is different for everybody. And we're going to go back to that again later on. But it wasn't just Aristotle who was thinking about happiness. Loads of ancient Greek philosophers were thinking about it. Okay, so what the Greek schools of thought did was they provide us with our first conceptualizations or definitions of well-being. They kind of chunked it up into different types. So one school of thought was hedonism, and this was about the pleasures of the moment. It's a little bit like the ancient Egyptians and Bes. Okay, in other words, it was looking for joy and happiness right now through whatever means necessary. Things like music and dance and sex and stuff like that. Maybe drinking, maybe drugs, all kinds of stuff. So the idea then is what pleasures and desires are kind of okay, and are some more okay than others. Right? So there's a bit of a kind of judgment there as to sort of what hedonism is and what hedonism provides you in your life. Then you've got the Epicurists who said actually you should be aiming for a tranquil life. Happy and tranquil life, peaceful, free from fear and pain. It's self-sufficient and you're surrounded by friends. That sounds really nice actually, doesn't it? Okay, so that's different from the hedonism one. And then an alternative was the virtuous life, which was very much about moderation. Yeah, it was about life being pleasant and joyful, but not excessively, but also you doing good in the world, you being out there and making other people's lives better. So there was also here, as you can see, a sort of quite a lot of extremes. Yeah, there's kind of happiness as this joyful thing that you should kind of seek, and then there's happiness or the good life being reached in the right way by doing good, by in moderation. So, what came from these ancient Greeks and their thoughts and their thinking was one way to kind of separate well-being into two types, which you may have kind of spotted already. So what the Greek schools of thought did was allow people to separate well-being into two. There was the hedonic or hedonia, which was about pleasure, about feeling good, about trying to maintain this temporary state of enjoyment. And it tended to be about physical pleasures, all right? So we're still kind of thinking about the kind of ancient Egyptians thing. But remember that Aristotle was saying that we can't really define what happiness is. It means different things to different people. So it isn't necessarily about physical pleasures, but that's what tends to be assumed. Then we've got this other type of well-being. We've got eudaimonia, which is about living well and doing well. So it's not only about doing good things in the world, but it's about yourself, about doing your best, realising your true potential, about being authentic, about finding meaning and purpose in life. Okay, so this kind of says that there's sort of two different types of well-being. One seems quite about happiness and joy, and one seems, and that happiness and joy is almost regardless of source. In other words, you could be feeling good all the time because of sex and drugs and rock and roll, or because of charity work and being with friends and a lot more worthwhile things. So the source of that joy and happiness and hedonic feelings doesn't really matter. And then you've got this more eudaimonic well-being, which is more kind of worthy, meaningful and purposeful. Okay, so what we're kind of saying is that you could split well-being into two, and that's kind of what Aristotle was trying to do. Okay, now don't forget this. This is something we come back to. We're going to jump in time now. So this is what the Greeks did. We're jumping in time. We're jumping to just after the Second World War. Why are we doing this? Because the Greeks were really just thinking and talking and writing things down. What is well-being? What is a good life? How should we live our lives? And of course, well-being was studied in various ways over the years between the Greeks and the Second World War. But what was happening was that well-being was being studied in kind of lots of different varied ways as part of studying other things. So it wasn't until just after the Second World War that sort of having an overarching idea about exactly what is well-being came about. This was because they wanted to find out how people were doing after the Second World War. They wanted to maybe help survivors. They wanted to see how the nation was doing afterwards. So to measure the mental health of a nation, they had to think about how to do it. In other words, what are we going to measure for well-being? So this is where Bradburn came in. Bradburn wanted to know how people are doing. Are you coping okay? Are you doing okay? This is not really looking at mental illness. Bradburn was looking at the mental health of the general population away from diagnoses of mental illness and psychiatry. Okay, so he didn't want to measure clinical depression or anxiety. He just wanted to know, is your life okay? So he took inspiration from our ancient Greek friends. He decided that finding out how happy the nation was would be an approximation of how they were doing. So he's gone, right, Aristotle says happiness is the most important thing. So if I find out how happy people are right now after the Second World War, it should indicate how they're doing. Okay, now he is conflating happiness and well-being a little bit there and saying they're the same thing, and we'll get back to that later. But essentially he's saying he wants to measure well-being. And off he goes. He's now conceptualizing well-being as the balance of good feelings or positive effect and negative feelings, negative effect. This was actually quite groundbreaking, because what he was doing was treating them as separate things, measuring them separately, and establishing that they were not necessarily related or exactly the same. They have to be measured separately. In other words, if you're doing well and you're okay and you're feeling good, you will have lots of positive feelings and few negative. Fair enough. That seems kind of obvious, but what he identified is that they are independent. One way for you to look at this is that in a particular time frame, for example a day or a week or a month or a year, you could experience lots of positive feelings and lots of negative, or not experience much of either. In other words, just because you've got lots of negative feelings, it doesn't mean that you haven't got lots of positive. So hopefully you can see how they're basically two separate things. So yes, the people with greater well-being will have lots of positive well-beings and fewer negative, but you won't get a full picture if you only ask about one type. Fabulous. Okay. So we're off to another kind of conceptualization of well-being. So we've got our ancient Greek concepts and we've got Bradburn. But about 30 years later, Andrews and Withy were also interested, just as Bradburn was, in how a nation was doing. And they decided that another way to think about well-being was not just as a balance of good or bad feelings, but treating it as a thoughtful process. In other words, people can think through whether or not they're satisfied or happy or content if you just ask them. So they kind of started off the kind of creation of life satisfaction surveys. They asked people to think about, how do you feel about your life as a whole? Are you satisfied with your life as a whole? And people would respond on a scale from maybe 7, brilliant, delighted, to terrible. So hopefully you can see how this differs from Bradburn's version. He asked specifically about positive and negative feelings and then did the kind of calculation to get the balance. Andrews and Withy are taking that step away. They're letting people think about whatever they want to. People can decide for themselves what they weigh up in their mind to decide if their life is okay. They might not be thinking about positive feelings. They might be thinking about something else. They've got the choice to bring to mind whatever they like to decide how they feel. So it kind of opens up the scope then to it being a cognitive decision that people are making, rather than just their thinking about positive and negative feelings that are presented to them. Okay, it's probably time for break now. So, little mini task. Go and get yourself a cup of tea and a biscuit or something like that. And then sit down with your post-it notes or your notepad or whatever you had, and think about whether you can identify a day recently when you felt particularly happy. Just jot a few notes down about what you did on this day, or write a little bit about what it was that made you happy. It should only take you 5 minutes or so. I'm going to turn this off and I'll see you in part 2. Bye!